Welcome to Shadowed Tales Archive. Tonight, we invite you to descend into darkness with a chilling anthology of horror stories, each one inspired by true events. This is episode 25. Let the nightmare begin. The Cave of Serapion. I'm unsure of what to say. All I can say is that I'm scared. Very scared. My hands shake violently as I hastily scribble down a few words onto the coarse wooden tablet. This is my only hope. In the month of Tammuz, day 25 of the year 569, I, Serapion, son of Enmedric, navigator, have come here to the country of Nice. Bless the God who has brought us here, and you, the man who reads this tablet, bless me as well and leave the tablet in this place where you find it. That is what it reads. That's all I'm able to write. I'm so tired. I'm so weary. I set the tablet against a mound, careful that it will not fall down, and go on my way through the pitch blackness of this grand cave. I have been trapped here for days. It started when I left Palmyra, that great oasis city in the Levantine desert. I was to travel to the city of Aksum in Ethiopia to deliver silk textiles. Then I was to sail the vast sea to the lands of Persia and sell similar textiles to the cities of Istakhr, Ecbatana, and Ctesiphon, the Persian capital on the Tigris. From there, I was supposed to return to my homeland by caravan and receive payment. However, once I had left Aksum, the storm god, Hadad, brought a great monsoon wind upon my vessel and ran us aground at the island of Nice. It is almost uninhabited, but my friends, Malek and Orias, had decided to seek out locals for shelter. I was to explore the nearby coastal cave to find food. I was not 10 cubits inside when I tumbled down a shaft and into the deep bowels of this cave. I was unable to climb back up, and so I was forced to go further into the tunnels. There were no signs of humanity, save for inscriptions of a foreign tongue that I could not read. My hopes of returning to the surface quickly vanished into the moist air around me. I tearfully accepted this futility, crawled into a corner, and let sleep embrace me. I was awoken at some odd hour of the night. The cave was eerily silent, but there was a pungent odor emanating from the depths of the tunnels. It smelled as if someone had boiled a rotten carcass in blood. I rubbed my eyes and stood up. Then the sound started. A clicking sound, like somebody picking at their nails. I progressed into the darkness. I held my hands in front of me, the darkness concealing whatever lay ahead of me. The sound was louder now, but it seemed to be coming from two different directions. That's when I reached a fork in the tunnel. The smell had gone away, but the sound had not. In fact, there were two of them now. The same sound was emitted from each side of the fork. I ventured into the one on my right. As I walked, the tunnel seemed to shrink ever so slightly with each step I took. All the while, the sound was getting louder and louder until I reached a dead end. The sound was clear as day. It was coming from all around. Then it abruptly stopped. The smell returned, so overbearing I almost fainted. Slowly, I turned around. Immediately, my heart stopped. This thing stood before me. I can't explain what it was. It was a hunched-down, twisted human-like thing. It had gray skin and piercing yellow eyes. Its hands and feet were contorted and bore sharp white claws, which were curved like scythes. There were no eyes. Its mouth grinned wider than possible, and this grimace revealed scores of small, sharp teeth in rows. The thing opened its mouth even wider and let out an ear-splitting shriek, leaping towards me like a lion. I awoke in a sweat. Nothing. There were no sounds, nor any ripe-smelling air. Once again, I stood up and looked around. The cave was still dark, but the air had become thicker, like the mist hanging over the Efka spring on a hot summer day. I took one step and almost collapsed. The floor of the cave had become soft. It was like mud, but more dense. It still felt like rock when I touched it with my hands, and yet it squelched underfoot. The walls of the cave shuddered. Was I dreaming? It simply couldn't be. The walls were pulsating like veins. I kept walking. Then, the clicking started again. The smell returned as well. I was mortified, too scared to move on for fear of death. I pulled a tablet from beneath my robe and wrote that note to whoever or whatever will find me. It's too much. I leave the tablet beneath that mound, and as soon as I do, the floor of the cave becomes softer. My feet sink into it and leave deep impressions. The clicking sound stops. Light comes from a side tunnel of the cave, and I move towards it. Suddenly, the floor gives way again, and I find myself falling for a second time. I hit the ground hard, and the tunnel starts spinning. I'm so dazed, I only have the energy to stare upwards at the ceiling. A face appears. The thing is back. It is reaching for me. I start to drift off, and it smiles. The world becomes black, my eyelids close, and 1,000 tiny pins push into my skin. Author's note: Serapion was a real person who lived and died almost 2,000 years ago. He was a native of Palmyra, Syria, who became lost in the hot cave on Socotra, a secluded island near Somalia. The tablet and its inscription were found by archaeologists exploring the cave. They followed Serapion's wishes and left the tablet where it was found. You can read more about Serapion and Socotra here. The Bowie Asylum incident. At first, the drinking days were fast, fun, and filled with hilarity. Booze and pot were cheap, and so were musical performances at venues and other places. Parties were easy to find too. Crashers were even welcomed as long as they weren't empty-handed grifters and scrubs. The economy was fine, jobs were aplenty, and none of us had spouses or children back then. In the 90s, we didn't have internet access or smartphones, not even regular cellular phones. I think a handful of us had pagers. We relied on word of mouth, zines, or flyers for the scoop on social events. It was rare to be all dressed up with no destination on a weekend night in Northern Virginia. We were just a short drive from the nation's capital. Killing the third-to-last beer of the last 12-pack of ale, Mick asked, "And what about a strip club?" with an audible slur in his loud, overbearing speech. "Don't you guys want to see some naked chicks?" I rolled my eyes and looked over at Ryan, who had a similar reaction. As appealing as the idea sounded, we'd spent the majority of our weekend spending cash already. We had no idea of what was going down that night or where the rest of the gang was. Remember, no cell phones. If you got left behind, that was that. You were stuck at home. If you were lucky, someone would call and let you in on where the action was. We didn't even have enough money for one of our sorry asses to get a lap dance, and Mick was talking about painting the town red. Mick, my kid brother, was acting like a moron. But that's how 19-year-olds act when they drink too much. Ryan was the same age, but somehow managed to keep his cool better than Mick. I was 2 years older than the both of them, making me the only one legal to buy booze. We didn't have a clue. What we did have was $26, a Honda Civic with a full tank of gas, and the motivation to keep things rolling. We weren't about to call it a night just yet. "Leo," Ryan said to me, "it's 12 o'clock and no one's called. If we leave now, I can get us across the border and at a checkout counter well before 2 o'clock. I'm sure if something's going down, the boys will leave us a message on the answering machine." Ryan was right. I don't know how it is now, but back then, any place in Virginia that sold liquor was legally obligated to lock up their booze at midnight. Alcohol sales between midnight and 6 a.m. were strictly prohibited. However, Maryland sold booze until 2 a.m. I can't count how many times we did 90 miles per hour or faster across that Woodrow Wilson Bridge, over the Potomac River, and into the state of Maryland just for a 12-pack and some cheap ghetto wine. A fly-by-night, last-minute beer run sounded like it could be enjoyable. Finally, someone was starting to make some sense. I laced up my docs and brought a mag light in case of road rage. I concealed it in the inside pocket of my bomber jacket and made for the car. Mick threw on his chucks and his hoodie and grabbed his mag light too. Before we knew it, we were in Ryan's Civic jumping on 495 with Baltimore's very own Gut Instinct blaring through the Kenwood tape deck. Hardcore isn't the same these days. It was both the journey as well as the destination that were so exhilarating to us. At the end of the line were containers full of that ice-cold, gut-warming, magical elixir that would make us feel woozy and take us God knows where. Drinking was our favorite pastime, followed all too closely by the social deviance that came with it. Vandalism, petty theft, street scuffles, and other forms of criminal mischief paired with public intoxication were always shits and giggles all around. The background music was hardcore punk. We didn't have a care in the world, and fuck you if you weren't one of us. Traffic was dead, a cool night air settled in, and the bridge was in sight. We were almost there. We were making good time, so I made Ryan slow down lest we get pulled over. Aside from driving a little drunk, which was easy to talk your way out of back then, we had nothing illegal on us. No drugs, no weapons, no explosives. As long as we didn't speed, we'd be in the clear. Ryan knew of a spot, and we took an exit just a few miles into Prince George's County, Maryland. We always made our nighttime. Maryland beer runs quick. We stuck together and tried not to draw attention to ourselves. As quiet as we were, people still stared when we entered the liquor store. We said nothing. We grabbed 2 12-packs of Killian's and 3 40-ounce bottles of Crazy Horse malt liquor before making our way to the checkout line. It was while we were in line that Mick spotted a copy of a local rag with a story about an abandoned hospital vandalized by local youths. It wasn't my first time hearing about the abandoned Glendale Hospital in Bowie, Maryland. I've been there once with some punks from Richmond. The place was intense. Dozens of vacant, rotting buildings of older architectural style scattered the property with a network of underground tunnels, mostly flooded, connecting the above-ground structures. We got high and played tag that time. As I told Ryan and Mick about it, I could see how stoked they were getting. "How we get there?" asked Ryan. We had booze, motivation, and somewhere to be. I felt optimistic about the evening's improvisational adventure unfolding. The increase in vegetation and further collapse of the hospital wards enhanced the experience. The eerie resemblance to the backdrop of a sci-fi horror film or comic was uncanny and thrilling. We immediately regressed in our delight and played as children on a jungle gym. The mag lights came in handy for their actual intended purpose. After a half hour of running the grounds and scouting the perimeters, we were ready to brave the rusty cages. We entered with caution. The damp air reeked of mold, oxidation, pigeon shit, spray paint, and God knows what else. There were glass shards with bits of Brillo scattered about and freshly spray-painted tags on the walls. We were on land that previous visitors, ones possibly with worse intentions than ours, had claimed. We should have left, but we pressed onward. After half an hour of not coming into contact with other humans, we let our guards down. We found dormitories, labs, a morgue, journals, and magazines. We discovered underground passages that connected above-ground structures. Ryan almost fell into an empty elevator shaft. We climbed up and onto the roofs of several of the largest buildings. The network of hallways, tunnels, and chambers was amazing. Then the thrill and drunkenness both began to subside. The harsh reality was that our playground was a place where people were quarantined for incurable diseases and left to die. These barren walls and drab colors were the last home they knew before they retired to an early grave. It was a hard thought that led to our decision to go find the Civic and head for the bridge. It really should have been that simple. Leaving the hospital, we heard footsteps, voices, and that unmistakable static-filled feedback on a handheld radio. We ducked out behind an entryway, shut off our mag lights, and kept quiet. We knew exactly how to go about situations like this. No words needed to be exchanged. We all knew what to do. We kept quiet and kept our cool and simply waited for the cops to go away. Those 8 minutes went by as slow as an hour. That's how long 8 minutes seem when you're standing in the pitch black with your kid brother and your friend, not uttering a peep and hoping you won't spend the night in county jail. Following the trail that brought us in, we gradually sneaked our way to the Civic. Thankfully, it had not been discovered and towed by police patrolling the area. Impound fees were beyond our budget, and we were in the middle of nowhere. It was just past 3:30 a.m. We'd had our fill and were ready for bed. Sweaty and smelly, we plopped our soggy asses into the tiny Japanese hatchback. We lit some smokes, cracked some brews, and headed for the bridge. Who would have thought such a poorly planned night could go from being a total bust to being such an event? With the windows down and music on, we made for the freeway, mistakenly convinced that the peak of our adventure was well behind us. We laughed at the patrol trailer on our way out. The fatigue and the alcohol probably had a lot to do with our getting lost. Getting lost was what led to the arguments that followed. Each of us arrogantly proclaimed his own righteousness, insisting that the predicament was surely the fault of the other two parties. It was ridiculous. At some point, Ryan pulled over at a truck stop and got directions back to 495. Thanks to the full tank we started out with and the fuel efficiency of his ride, we had plenty of juice to get us back on track. We were so far off the grid, it was pathetic. Once we knew we had the right directions, we apologized to one another and laughed about how far from home we were. Ryan got drowsy, but was coherent enough to co-pilot the trip. Mick was drooling on the back seat with his eyes closed. I took the helm and followed my friend's directions to our home in Fairfax, Virginia. At some point, we ended up on a winding, desolate stretch of freeway. To this day, I cannot remember what route we were on. 2 lanes went one way, and 2 lanes the opposite on a road almost completely devoid of light, save for that provided by the moon and the stars. It was almost 4:30 in the morning. How true it is, as they say, that it is darkest before the dawn. The headlights piercing the pitch black ahead reminded me of our mag lights leading our way through that maze of decay just a few hours prior. What night we'd had! Ryan had given me the last of the directions and closed his eyes to pass out. It was many miles, but few turns to get us back to 495, so I took the sole responsibility of our return navigation. As the front left fender of the car seemingly devoured the dotted lines on the road, I could see the tree lines on either side of the car in my peripheral vision. I glided down the right lane. Ever so gradually, the tree line in my left peripheral vision faded from sight into an abysmal blackness. It was as if someone had draped the left side of the Civic with a giant black curtain blocking out everything to the left of the vehicle from sight. I winced, blinked, and shook my head, attributing it to the onset of extreme fatigue. "Ryan, wake the fuck up." "Ryan." He groaned some swear words. "Look, dude, I'm nodding the fuck out. You gotta take the wheel." As that last sentence came out of my mouth, I felt my pulse race and my stomach rise to my throat. Although I did not fully comprehend what was happening, I got the undeniable feeling in my gut that something was seriously wrong. The dark mass was quite clearly a large moving object, a vehicle perhaps, with no headlights, marker lights, or tail lights. No lights at all. It mysteriously navigated the twists and turns as effortlessly as if it were daylight out. All the while it kept pace with the Civic, staying dangerously close to our left. "What the hell is it, man? What the fuck?" Ryan's sweaty back was pressed against the inside of the front passenger door while he outwardly panicked. He'd awakened to a state of perplexity and terror that exceeded my own. I tried to outrun the dark mass. I got the little hatchback up to 114 miles per hour, and the dark mass didn't skip a beat. When I slammed on my brakes, it slowed down as well. It was almost as if it was an extension of our own vehicle. I couldn't shake him for the life of me. Mick by now was fully awake. Unlike Ryan, he was so full of fear he had fallen dead silent. My panic gave way to anger. "Brace yourselves. Hold on to something," I shouted to my 2 passengers as I attempted to sideswipe the object. That, too, was of no use as it turned in direct response to the Civic. I shouted and cursed in my open window. Just then a light came on. It was my mag light. Ryan was shining it on the object. Once we realized it was in fact a big black car, Ryan attempted to blind the driver with the mag light to get him to leave us alone. "Take that, motherfucker!" we shouted as we laughed and cheered, pleased with ourselves and our childish antic. when all the lights of our unwanted neighboring vehicle, including the interior dome light, simultaneously came on, our laughter fell silent. The pilot and the passenger of the mammoth-sized, vintage hearse that taunted us mercilessly were virtually identical. Their grotesque appearance forced Ryan to retreat with a mag light. The interior dome light of the hearse revealed the silhouette of two large individuals that both looked putrid. I literally mean they looked like animatronic cadavers. They looked as though they could be almost 7 feet tall standing. The driver's hands were so huge they made the steering wheel look small. Between glancing forwards at the road ahead and staring at the ghastly scene beside me, I took in what I could. I tried to tell myself they were wearing masks, but the rancid appearance of their facial flesh matched the necrotic hue and texture of the driver's hands. Both were clad in outdated, formal attire. In spite of the lights on their vehicle being activated, the precision of their navigation was still a mystery. Both figures had their gazes fixed on us and not the road ahead, while somehow managing to make the necessary maneuvers to avoid a collision. Once again, as a last-ditch effort, Ryan aimed the mag-light beam at the driver's face to make him go away. Oh my God. Oh my fucking God. I didn't know what had just happened, but Ryan was losing his shit. What is it, man? What happened? I yelled. Mick spoke up. Don't look, Leo, don't look. Don't speed up, don't slow down. Just keep your eyes straight ahead and keep driving. This whole thing sounds so absurd when I talk to people about it nowadays. It truly doesn't do any of the experience any justice at all. We didn't mention the hearse incident for years. On the night of Mick's bachelor party, Ryan and I were somehow able to find humor in the memory, but Mick was not. The very mention of the incident almost ruined the event. We never brought it up in front of him again. Ryan and I too eventually got married and started families. A distance grew between us, but somehow we managed to maintain a friendship. We laugh about the whole thing and decided it was all part of some prank intended to keep us away from the area. It makes things easier for us, but it doesn't explain a lot. Someone once told me that what is seen cannot be unseen. I don't have many regrets in my life, but I regret looking. Mick was firm when he told me to face forward and keep driving, to not look at the hearse to my left. My curiosity got the better of me. The flashlight revealed unsettling features that I still can't make sense of. Both pilot and passenger were in a total state of decay. Their mouths and eyes, wide open, lacked any sign of human resemblance. The mouths had no teeth or tongues. The eyes were empty, cavernous pits of darkened meat. When I gazed into their faces, I instantly felt an indescribable emptiness wallow up inside of me. It was the lowest low I'd ever felt in my entire life. That's the best way to describe it. The very sight of their faces seemed to draw any kind of positive energy I had inside of me right out. To call the incident traumatic would be a huge understatement. But Ryan and I force a laugh when the story comes up. We say it was a hoax, even though it doesn't adequately explain what we experienced. It doesn't even make sense of their speedy getaway. After I saw their faces, we began to approach a stretch of highway lined with streetlights. Once again, I tried to outrun the abominations that followed. I got the Civic up to 120 miles per hour this time, but the hearse began to pass. In fact, it accelerated to such an awesome extent, it dwindled our 120 mile per hour travel speed to a seeming standstill, leaving us as if we were stopped at a traffic light. As it did so, the engine and electronics inexplicably gave out in the Civic, and we began to slow to a stop. As our vehicle decelerated, we could see the hearse continue to race forward up ahead. We watched each street light it passed flicker uncontrollably before completely powering down. Then it vanished from our sight. We still insist on telling ourselves it was a show of sorts, a ploy on the part of locals to keep troublemakers at bay, a way to scare off hooligans and trespassers. It doesn't add up, but it works for us. It makes it easier to sleep at night. Whispers beyond the door. Ethan Cole Barrett. You gave your soul to him on May 7th, 1989. And it was a lie that you told the whole time you held your breath in that brown water river. A lie you smiled out at those holy rollers on the bank. Lies are mine, lies are mine, mine. The last mine trailed off into a phlegmy wheeze. These words were clearly audible, despite the man lying face down and away from the windowed door to the isolation cell. The heavy steel meal flap was standing open to facilitate communication and accommodate feeding times. But usually the cell's hard surfaces made an echo that distorted every sentence into chaos. This man's words, though, were not only audible, but guttural, far deeper than the inmates' normal speaking tones. I am his, Ethan whispered, his voice tight and his chest light from raw fear. There was no way for this man to have known his full name, and there was no way for him to have known that dark and shameful secret that Ethan had never spoken aloud. He was just a kid when he was baptized. He didn't really understand the significance or the need, until he and his wife had their first son. Introspection accompanied late-night feedings and changes. The need for something greater and a higher purpose drove him to accept the religion he'd long ago been a part of, but had never really had be a part of him. He had taken a job in the county's number 2 industry. First was farming, chiefly cattle. Second was the state prison. He had been on the job for 3 years when he encountered Reyes, Malcolm, number 200-400097. Reyes had transferred in from another facility, and he was on year 2 of a 6-year sentence out of Atlanta. He had been in medical isolation for most of his incarceration, and he was now in segregation for his own safety and the safety of others. Medically speaking, physically, there was nothing wrong with him. Psychologically, he had several diagnoses that required a small buffet of medications morning and night. Ethan's encounters with Reyes had been completely routine in nature. Meals were delivered, medications were administered, the head count was conducted. No conversations ever occurred outside of good morning, please, and thank you. But every day, each and every day that Ethan stood shift in the isolation unit, Reyes would act out between 2 and 2:15 p.m. These episodes mostly consisted of shouting, dancing, stripping, and speaking in tongues or singing. No seizures or convulsions. No physically damaging behavior ever presented itself and necessitated that restraints be used. So regular were these outbursts that somebody could set a watch by them, which was in itself odd, because inmates in isolation had absolutely no way to tell time. To make matters even more interesting, after a few weeks, Ethan's supervisor claimed that the episodes only went down when Ethan was in the building. There was no exterior window, nor any way for Reyes to have heard or seen when Ethan was working a duty rotation in isolation, until Ethan himself came to his door. Some days, Ethan never went into the cell blocks. Instead, he worked solely in the control room. And still, the episodes presented themselves at around 2 p.m. Ethan never told anyone at work about what Reyes said. He did his job day in and day out, and he did his best to pretend that nothing had happened. He always tried to avoid being in the cell blocks around 2 p.m. For several weeks, this worked, until one day, time got away from him, and he found himself doing a head count at 2:15. When Ethan came to the window, his heart stopped, standing stock still with his nose inches away from the reinforced glass. Reyes was completely rigid, absolutely, perfectly tense, and on the balls of his feet. Every muscle in his naked, wiry frame was taut, as though his whole body was experiencing a cramp. His eyes were saucers, opened as wide as they would possibly go, and they constantly rolled, around, back until only the whites would show, and then back down and around and around. When Ethan's eyes met his, Reyes stopped his eye rolls. Silence filled the cell and the hallway. Laughter, slow and low, greeted Ethan, and then that same guttural voice that had haunted him for weeks spoke. "Cole Barrett, would you like to see what we do to this man when no one watches? Let us show you." With that, Reyes head-butted the reinforced glass window. His forehead hit with such force that the steel door shook in its frame. And Ethan was amazed that the glass didn't spiderweb. Twice he hit the window, and before Ethan could call for support to get Reyes restrained, a fourth and fifth impact sounded on the steel edge of the window frame. And as suddenly as the assault began, it ended. Reyes regained his tense pose on the balls of his feet. His eyes, still wide as saucers, met Ethan's. Blood slowly poured from large gashes above the inmate's eyebrows, covering his face in a red mask. There was absolutely no expression, no indication of pain, anger, or distress. Perfectly impassive, Reyes stared. Ethan broke eye contact and walked on. A short time later, when medics arrived to clean him up, he had curled up and was asleep on his cot. And at final meal call of the day, he said, "Thank you," to Ethan in his normal speaking voice. As though nothing had happened, Ethan could barely hide the shake in his hands as he handed over the tray of food. Corrections Officer Barrett had grown up in the Pentecostal church. His grandmother, Eloise, 93, still went every Sunday and Wednesday, and twice a month she attended Sunday school. He was driving her to a Wednesday evening service when he told her about Reyes. Her hand, covered in parchment-thin skin and decorated with liver spots and bruises, gripped his on the steering wheel. He drove with his left, as she, with surprising strength, took his right hand in hers. "Don't let him in, son. Don't you let him. He knows when those belong to Jesus come round. He smells it. He hates it. You pray on it, year. You pray to Lord Jesus. I'll pray with you. You pray with me today. And you look at that man in the eye the next time he acts the fool. You look at him, and you tell him to give you his name by the will of the Lord. He will. You ain't gonna understand him, son, but he will. He'll do it if you're right with TH Lord. Get right, boy, and stay right. And you get clear. You stay away from that, His grandmother was telling the truth. Weeks went by, and Ethan heard nothing unusual out of inmate 200-400-097. Just when he was beginning to think that the whole thing was a strange game, something happened. Reyes had maintained his routine of showing out at around 2 p.m. daily. By coincidence and not design, Ethan had not found himself on the floor at these episodes. Ever since the day he'd rammed his head into the doorframe, Reyes had been calmer, only whispering, whimpering quietly, or singing to himself during his regular shows. It was mid-song that Ethan entered line of sight for Reyes. Abruptly, the singing stopped, and Reyes faced the door. "I don't like it when you're here, Barrett." This came out as all one word, a husky whisper, but still that deep tone that was so unlike every other time the prisoner spoke. Barrett became Barrett in the latest attempt to rattle the officer. "Hey, by Jesus, tell me your name. Who are you? By Christ's command, what is your name?" Ethan shouted the last word, and the echoes filled the concrete hallway. Reyes recoiled as though struck. He looked to be in physical pain, but Ethan heard him speak. The jeering, cheerful face was pinched, and a word came from his lips in a rasp. Ethan heard it clearly, but he couldn't understand it. It sounded foreign. It sounded alien. It sounded other. "I have heard your name. Never. Speak. To. Me. Again." With that, the inmate curled up into a ball on his bed. That was the last time that Malcolm Reyes ever spoke to Ethan Cole Barrett. Ethan Barrett's hand shook as he snubbed out his last Marlboro Red. A collection of them sat bent, burned, and broken in the silver ashtray between us. We both leaned our elbows on the pinewood picnic table where we'd shared a meal and a story. He thumbed through the pages of the book by Malachi Martin I'd been reading before he sat down to eat with me today. Cover fluttering in the wind, Hostage to the Devil had gained its own seat at our table as he put it down next to the remains of my chicken salad sandwich. "I don't need to read about this in a book or see in a movie, man. I've seen it in real life. What scares me most, though, is that it has seen me." Daemon.exe. I don't know how to start my story, but I guess I'll begin with the basic information and work my way down. I used to be a computer junkie, so I tended to spend a lot of time surfing the web, reading blogs, articles, Facebook, the whole 9 yards. But my main focus was gaming. I loved a game. World of Warcraft, League of Legends, Diablo 3, ESO. I could go on. I'd spend most of my time playing games when I wasn't at work, which was just contracting work that my dad helped me find to get me out of the house. I always caught myself wondering if I'd ever break out of my borderline lethal addiction to do something with my life that actually mattered to other people, mostly because I just wanted everyone to piss off and mind their own business. My sister would say, "I don't understand how you can spend so much time on something with no actual rewarding outcome besides a couple of measly points and theoretical money." I didn't let that bother me, though. It was more than that. I like the graphic satisfaction of being something I'm not. Having ultimate power over actual people who are just disguised as creatures, but who are trying just as hard as I am and not getting anywhere near as close to my greatness. It was real to me, and I loved every minute of it. I never thought that one day I would throw my computer away. And not just throw it away. Throw it so hard into the dumpster, it shattered, sparked, and caused it to catch fire. Just thinking about it brings me anxiety. I trust right now my once very expensive, custom-designed computer is sitting somewhere, destroyed in a landfill collecting trash scum. Good. A few months back, I upgraded my system. I had just downloaded a new MMORPG game, and I had to buy an entirely separate processor because I had modified my game so much, plus I have multiple games on my system. I'll admit right here and now, I had done some dark things to get my computer to where it was then. Nothing evil or inhumane, just illegal. Okay, normally having several games will slow your game system down dramatically, but I wasn't having that. I had spent all my hard-earned money modifying my system so I could continue to reign power over all the N00 BS and wannabes. I was king. I was to have the best system. Slow wasn't an option. I named my system Daemon.exe because it was my favorite name. It was an older name, and it was ironic to have a modern system with an old name. It was always in my username too for my games. Granted, I almost never got just Demon for my username, so it was usually like Demon320498812 or Demon King of Lands or something like that. My best friend Caleb and I played together all the time. We were both ranked up pretty high and were competing for a chance to play for actual money in a tournament. And a lot of money too. So naturally, we spent so much playing that eventually people began to worry about us. We were obsessed. Hooked. The computer was our drug. Thank God we weren't using anything stronger than coffee. One day, I was in the middle of a battle I had been going at for about an hour and a half. I was doing so well, I almost had it beat when a black spot appeared on the screen. It was like a giant pixel that decided to block the way of my health and points. At first I assumed it was a little glitch, but it wouldn't go away. I swore heavily at the spot, ignoring it best I could until eventually I lost the battle because it was in the way of sight. I heard Caleb swearing too. He was on my team, and we just lost an important battle that could place us in the finals. "The fuck happened, dude?" he asked with a pissed off tone. "Goddamn glitch. I have to get Demon looked at." I called Geek Squad and had them take a look at Demon. "Well," the text said, "your system is overheating. When's the last time you turned it off?" I looked away with slight shame. "Well, probably 2 or 3 weeks. The guy laughed. "Gotta give her a rest, kid. You could ruin this beautiful thing if you don't turn it off once in a while." He was right. He said, sometimes the screen can get damaged if overheating occurs, but it should go away in time. The next day, I turned the computer back on. The spot was still there. I felt myself get angry. That geek better be right. I thought. I paid him $100 to give her a good look, but the spot never vanished. It stayed there. In fact, the following day, it seemed to get bigger. Only by a few millimeters, but it was noticeable. Fuck it, I thought, and logged into my game. I wasn't about to let a little pixel ruin my chances of winning a couple $1,000. When I was on TeamSpeak, Caleb gave a huge sigh. "Dude, we're never going to make it into the finals. We might as well give it up." I was offended by his tone. The only reason we lost was because of me and this stupid fucking spot. I wanted to win some money for being the best goddamn game king to exist. No, I said angrily, we're going to win this thing. Come on, man. We began battle. We were kicking ass. We almost had the fuckers beat again. Then the spot began to flicker. But not like you're probably thinking. The best way to describe this flicker is a slow, every 3 seconds flicker. Then once a second, then once a minute, then switching between dark red, black, white, then almost like a blinding, glowing red. I thought I was going to lose my mind. My brain was flooded with hate thoughts towards the computer company. That's when I heard Caleb say, "Fucking motherfucking screen is messed up." I guess Caleb was experiencing some screen trouble too. Your screen's got issues too, man. I asked suddenly, glad I was no longer the reason of failure. "You failed," appeared on the screen, and I overheard glass break on Caleb's end. My guess was he'd thrown some kind of cup or bowl in a burst rage. I turned away from the computer and put my hands through my hair. Damn, it was greasy. It must have been at least a week since I'd showered. Fuck this game, dude. My computer can't handle the graphics, and the pace of the programming is just too much. He said, sounding like he was moments from going mad. "Let's try a different game." I grunted in approval, then turned and looked at the screen. I leaned in closer because I wasn't sure if I was seeing it correctly, but sure enough I was. The spot had multiplied, like chicken pox or poison ivy. It was spreading. I decided to ignore it, hoping it was some temporary glitching. I removed some other software games in hopes this would stop. For the next few days, I switched to another game and played with Caleb a few hours a day. But Caleb was slowly starting to distance himself from the computer. Since we lived a few towns away from each other, it was our only contact until school started up again. So naturally, I was missing his presence in the games we played together. I called him one night after shutting Demon off and noticed his voice was dreary. "I can't sleep, dude," he said with a troubling tone. "I wanted to win that game. It's haunting me. I can't get over it." I sighed. I wish the game wasn't so lame that it was messing with my computer. Caleb stopped breathing. "The game messed with Demon? Are you sure? Isn't Demon like top-of-the-line hardware? Even sort of illegally?" I laughed. "Yeah, but sometimes computers just can't handle everything no matter how fancy or expensive they are." Caleb laughed. "Okay." Caleb decided to take a bus over to my place the following weekend. He was obsessed with finding a way to play the game and wanted to figure out why my computer specifically was rejecting it. He couldn't seem to believe that my computer would reject it. I was worried about him, though. Something wasn't right with him. He claimed to be having dreams about being in the game and killing everyone gruesomely in his path, so he could just win. His face was pale. His eyes were dilated. He smelled pretty bad. He wasn't doing well. I was glad he decided to come over so we could spend real time together instead of obsess over this stupid game. I'd mentioned that I hadn't turned Demon on for a few days. He was thrilled about this. He begged me to turn it on since maybe that would make all the difference and maybe we could even get it up and running again. This made his eyes brighten and his face regain some color. I didn't want to do this, but if it would cheer him up, I was more than happy to give it a whirl. When Demon turned on, though, the both of us had the same blood-draining reaction to the computer screen. The spots had multiplied into a bizarre shape. It looked like some sort of evil, pagan look-alike symbol. It gave me the chills because the last time I'd seen it, it was only a few dots. Now it almost entirely covered the bottom half of the screen and was too obscure to shake off as a glitch. "The fuck?" I said, trying to click around. When I clicked, the computer made an awful, pitchy noise, but also sounded like when something electronic is malfunctioning, low-pitched, and almost like a whine. My stomach turned so badly I took my hand off the mouse. The moment that sound started, Caleb jumped up and fell backwards over his chair. He began to hyperventilate and sweat profusely. I looked over at him in shock and stood up as well. "Wow, Caleb, are you okay?" He shook his head, and I could see tears in his eyes. "Not you too. Not you too," he said over and over. I stared blankly at him for a moment and started to reach out for him, but he stood up and ran out the door. "Caleb, wait." I called after him, but he didn't respond. I scampered over to the window and watched him race off towards the bus stop. When he stopped to wait for the bus, I saw him talking to himself. Occasionally, he slapped his head a few times and shook while looking around suspiciously as if there were people watching him. I don't know if it was Demon that had scared him, but something suddenly drove him mad. I stood there for a moment and zoned out from the bizarre nature of what I had just witnessed. I wondered if I should call his dad or if maybe he was just having an episode. It was very bizarre and quite disturbing to witness. I had begun to forget about Demon until she started making that terrible sound again, and it wouldn't stop. It was continuing without reason. I tried to turn the computer off, but it didn't seem to want to shut up. In fact, trying to turn her off made the sound even worse. I even pulled the plug out, but it wouldn't stop. My dad came into the room and asked me if I was smoking cigarettes in my room again. I had once made the smoke detector make a similar, less creepy sound by trying to unplug it when I was going through my Pack-A-Day phase my freshman year of high school. I showed him the computer, and he said the sound would probably die after some time, like the smoke detector. So I threw a blanket over Demon, put on some sound-blocking headphones, and fell asleep. Before falling asleep, I had texted Caleb telling him to call me when he had a chance and that I hoped he was all right. I woke early morning to a red glow from Demon. At first I thought I was dreaming until the sound was faintly resonating throughout the room. The symbol was slowly pixelating from black to red, and it was flashing. I could see the shape perfectly from beneath the blanket. It was beginning to really freak me out. I pulled my blankets over my head and tried to think of something else, but I couldn't fall asleep. It was terrifying. Not even an hour later, I received a phone call. It was my dad, who was an EMT for the county. "Hey, sport," he said. There was a really dim tone in his voice. "Did I wake you?" I got out of bed, shielding my eyes from the red glow, and walked out of the room, downstairs to grab some milk from the fridge. No, I'm awake. "What's going on, Dad?" He sighed heavily and cleared his throat. "I received a call this morning to 55 Lake Drive. At first, I didn't recognize the address. I didn't realize where I was headed till I got there. It's Caleb's house." My stomach turned a knot. I almost hung up on him because I knew what was coming next. "We think Caleb committed suicide." I dropped the phone and thought maybe I was going to pass out. I had just seen him, not 24 hours ago. I heard my dad's voice shouting, so I quickly picked it back up. I'll admit, I'm a guy, and I have some pride, but I couldn't refrain from the tears and shouting. "You're out of your fucking mind, Dad. Caleb was a happy kid. He'd never do that. He'd never do that." Saliva and mucus drained from my nose and mouth. "I'm sorry, kiddo. He was a good kid." I hung up the phone and sat at the kitchen table for a long time, crying, thinking, wondering, how could he do that? How could he kill himself? He couldn't have. Then I wonder how he'd done it. When? He would have told me things. We were close. Best friends since first grade. The fuck, Caleb? Dad didn't come home for a few hours. I was still sitting at the table when he walked through the door. My face was swollen with misery. Caleb was my only best friend. I had other friends, but none like Caleb. He was cool. We had so much in common. Dad sat down at the table and looked at me. "I know you're probably taking this harder than ever, but there's an investigation going. The sheriff is on his way over to speak with you," he said sternly. I felt myself make a confused gesture with my eyebrows. "The sheriff? Thought it was a suicide." I said shakily, "Well, they think there could be some other factors that you personally may know about." I angrily put my hands in the air. "Like fucking what?" I shouted, assuming they thought maybe I had something to do with it directly. My dad slammed his hand down on the table. "You listen to me," he said, eyes so solidly gazing into mine, it made the hairs on my neck stand up. "You just better calm your ass down. I know this is hard. I know. I saw the poor kid's dead body, you hear? Now when the police are involved, it don't matter what they're trying to get out of you. You tell them everything you know, you understand?" I stared blankly at him and looked away. "Yes, sir." Around 12, the police arrived at my house. The sheriff made quite the entrance, if you know what I mean, smacking on a piece of gum, keys jangling with every step his clunky boots made, mustache right out of a Dirty Harry film. He tilted his sunglasses down and nodded his head towards me. "You must be Eli." I nervously nodded and put my hands together. "Yes, sir." He whipped out a file from seemingly nowhere and sat down across the table from me. He opened the file and removed his glasses. "You were close to Caleb, yes?" he asked. I nodded. "He was my best friend." He grunted. "When is the last time you saw him?" I looked right at him and leaned forward. "Yesterday, sir." He gave me a questionable look. He was going to try to intimidate me, and it was insulting. I tilted my head to the side. I knew he was going to drag this out, and quite frankly, I was in no mood to be fucked around with. "You gonna cut to the chase, or are we gonna pussyfoot around all day?" I said with a cold tone, waiting for the interrogation to begin. "Eli, you watch your fucking tone, young man," Dad began, but the sheriff silenced him with a gesture of his hand. "It's all right, Mark. If he wants to be treated like an adult, I'll respect that," he said, tossing a series of photos onto the table. "Your friend brutally murdered himself in his bedroom at what we believe to be around 2 in the AM. My heart almost stopped at the sight of the photos. Red, bloody, terrible, horrifying. The sheriff stabbed a fat finger onto the one of Caleb's bloody face. He stabbed himself in the eyes, the ears, and finally the throat. He bled out within the hour," he said with a strong southern accent. "We understand he was having some anxiety towards his obsessive computer use. Know anything about that?" I held back my tears as long as my manhood would let me. But it was only so long before the lump in my throat became so painful my voice was unbearable. He was upset about not being able to win a tournament. But I didn't know how obsessed he was. Not to this extent. My tears couldn't be held back. I felt them fall, and then winced when I realized they had fallen onto one of the photos. I looked down at the photo and felt my face go white when I realized I was staring at the same evil black pattern that my computer had displayed this morning. "You done look like you seen a ghost, young man. That photo mean anything to you?" I picked it up and stared at the blood-spattered computer. The pattern was the same. Half red, resembling an evil, demonic spiraled symbol of some kind. "Was there a sound?" I said, staring at the photo. The sheriff uneasily snagged the photo from me. "What do you know of the sound?" My dad and I stared at each other for a moment, then parted gazes. I turned to the sheriff and tried to make logical sense of this. I lied and told them Caleb had mentioned it to me. I told them I was convinced it was some sort of potentially untraceable hacker, and that Caleb was just obsessed with his game, that perhaps he was slowly developing a mental illness. So when the virus spread into the only thing that was making his life worth living to him, he lost his mind. I'll never forget that night Caleb came over and saw the same image on my screen. I wanted to mention it, but instead, I kept it to myself. Dad suggested I get rid of Demon, so I did. I threw her in the dumpster and watched her catch fire, slowly burning in her evil aura from hell. With a sound so awful you want to go deaf. A sight so horrible you want to go blind. A presence so dark, who knows what you'll do with yourself. I couldn't bring myself to post this online. I'm too afraid I will attract whatever it was again, so I forwarded this to a friend to repost. I will end by saying this. Demon, hacker, virus, whatever it was, it may still be out there. Please be careful. Rest in peace, Caleb. Eli. The Attic of Shadows. My mom is a terrible storyteller. She is a great conversationalist, a wonderful, sympathetic listener, and quite articulate in 2 languages and her native Calabrese dialect. Yet she is absolutely unable to narrate an event, personal or not, with any degree of conviction. She states the facts, but in an offhand fashion. One such example. "Oh yes, Cousin Rocky is okay. The transplant went well." Transplant? What? What happened to Rocky? I stuttered. "Oh well, Luca gave him the kidney, and he's fine now. Thank God." Could you please be a little less specific? I deadpanned, knowing full well I'd get a pretty short explanation of what I later found out to be the near death of my cousin, followed by an emergency transplant of the kidney of his brother Luca. That sort of thing. Yet, as banal as my mother may seem, I found out last week that she's been hiding something big from us. And now suddenly, a whole lot of the stuff we grew up with makes a lot more sense. My mom and dad are getting older. So when they sold their house and bought a small condo about a mile from me and Marco, we were quite relieved that I could keep a closer eye on them. It wasn't easy for Mom to make the move, as she stated. I just got the house as secure as possible, and now we're leaving. She was insistent, adamant even, that the condo they bought must be in a large development, on the ground floor with as many people around as possible. My father knew after 50 years of marriage to not even attempt to budge her from this decision. He also knew that there'd be webcams, burglar alarms, and double and triple locks on every door. It was cute at first when we moved from a crowded Brooklyn tenement to the house in Cortland, and my mom absolutely freaked out about the backyard being too damn dark. My dad had to install motion detector lighting, then very new and very costly, and lights in the driveway on a timer, lights on the sides of the house, and she insisted that the attic, which she would not enter or even allow us to explore, have its own timer lighting from dusk till dawn. Still, my dad adores my mom, and he did it all in resignation. That's love. Anyhow, so back to the attic. It was bolted shut. Always was. We kids went absolutely nuts about that. There was a whole other floor up there that we could not access. My father went up there twice, 3 times a year to change the lighting, but the door was shut behind him and locked from inside. Once he was done, the door was relocked and the padlock replaced. He'd do this when we weren't around, but I recall being home one time and hearing footsteps above my room. I raced to the top of the stairs and pounded on the door asking to be let in, but he'd start cursing in Italian about Una donna di quarantanice ha paura del bio. A 40-year-old woman afraid of the dark. I did get in the attic that time for about a hot second, and there was absolutely nothing up there. No Christmas decorations, no boxes nor old furniture, just plain white walls and those light fixtures. The windows had locks and nails driven into the sashes, so they couldn't be opened from within or without. It was pretty odd. Our little neighborhood never saw break-ins, and why bother double-locking a third-floor window that offered no access in or out of it? Another of my mother's quirks. Sometimes I'd hear my mom talking to my old aunt in Bari in the very difficult dialect that she would not teach us children, and I could make out words here and there about something that had happened when they were both young. Even when our Aunt Rosa, came to visit a few times, she would speak standard Italian to us and only shared the dialect with my mom. I wish I could have understood more of their conversations, but Barism is different enough that sometimes you could get the gist of the conversation, and sometimes not. It was the gaps that I filled and that scared me more. What thing came into their room? Was it a person? Did someone molest them? I could never understand. Any questions went unanswered. Even my dad was closed-mouthed about it. Living in the suburbs was great, especially in the summers. We'd be out all day, swimming in Mohegan Lake, going to the mall, hanging in any one of our friends' basements, and generally waiting for something interesting to happen. There was some blackout once, and the Carvel near the mall was giving out all the ice cream free before it melted. Random happy childhood memories. That was big for us. It was also one of the nights that we saw a frightened, childlike side of our mother. She kept asking the neighbors if anyone had a spare generator. They didn't, and we certainly did not. My dad was on business, and although the phones were working, think pre-cellular days, he told my mom that he'd have to stay a couple more days as the airports were closed due to the power outages. My mom was a bit shaken, and even though she put up a brave front, we knew that the darkness was not her friend. It was hot that night, swelteringly so, and we made our way up from the lake with our flashlights back to our darkened homes. Mom was on the porch, smoking cigarette after cigarette, and told us that we would all be sleeping in the living room that night. She made my brother and I pull the long sofa across the front door, and despite the heat, every window was closed and locked. Another quirk, I suppose. Around 3 a.m. or so, there must have been some lightning or some car noise outside, and my mom woke up screaming in a mix of Bariz and Italian. Next thing you know, we were all in the car, in the driveway, with the windows rolled up and the air conditioning blasting. It was a lot more comfortable than the living room, but morning could not come soon enough. We knew enough not to question Mom. Though sweet and lovable, there were things he didn't talk about with her. Not regular parent stuff like sex. My parents are pretty liberal and didn't even bat an eye when I came out as gay, and were relieved when I married my Italian, thank God, husband. But silly things. We didn't talk about my mom's fear of the dark, or all the locks, or all the lights, or the fact that we didn't go on vacations to the country, but stayed home and drove to the city for an afternoon or two, or how we couldn't join Boy Scouts, or sleepaway camp, or stay over anyone's house, or a number of things that were annoying to a kid. So here I am now, clearing out the last few boxes from the house. My parents closed on the condo and were already in it, but they had left a few small boxes behind which I volunteered to get. Take the keys to, Nina, my dad said. Which keys, Dad? How about the front and garage door? No, the attic. I almost forgot. Unlock it and leave the keys in the lock. I could barely contain my surprise. Sicuro. Non ti preoccupare, Papa. Slipping into Italian. Don't worry about it. I'll bring the boxes back here tomorrow. I had intended to go to the house later that day, but I got my brother on the phone and told him that I had gotten the keys. I didn't have to specify which keys. He knew. He actually called in sick to work and met me over at our old childhood home. We bounded up the attic stairs and could barely fit the keys into the lock. We were finally getting in there, even if it was just for a final goodbye to a space that we had barely seen. There was a box in the center of the room, which was strange because that room was normally barren. What the hell, sis? What is in that old dusty box? It was marked in childish handwriting, which I honestly didn't recognize. Open it up, Nina. The tape had long ceased to adhere to the carton, so I was able to open the package quite easily. It was a sheaf of drawing paper. There were what appeared to be children's drawings of my mom's and Aunt Rose's. And then something bizarre. Light bulb-shaped black figures with enormous cat-like eyes drawn, standing near my mom and aunt, near what looked like to be a child's drawing of a bedroom. Maybe a bedroom in Bari? An attic bedroom? And then writing beneath it, Quella notte che ci hanno preso. That night they took us, and it all made sense.
And that was tonight's tale from the Shadowed Tales archive. If it left a mark on your mind, if the silence feels heavier now, then the story did what it was meant to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the darkness. New stories are always on their way. Until then, keep the lights low and the doors locked.